So what is behavioral economics, and where does it come from, and what does it mean, and why am I talking about it? So behavioral economics really stems from the what I would call, what I think the industry calls, behavioral science, and that stems from behavior, right? Human behavior, and science. So it's the study of human behavior, but from a brain science, psychological view. Now, I'm going to say some stuff to the psychologists out there. I apologize. This is just my opinion. This is not canon. It's just how I see things. So psychology, in the early 1900s, right, there's Freudian psychology, and, everything was about, you wanted to have sex with your mother, and there was it was like this kind of mystical stuff. And then in the 50s, there was a pendulum swing away from that. And it wasn't about the id, and it wasn't about any of that stuff. It was about, okay, so I've dissected a brain, and when I poke the rat here, then the arm goes like this. So this part of the brain must be the thing that makes the arm go like this. So it was a very transactional, brain science research focus. And since then, I don't want to get into too much about psychology, but it's kind of swung back where, meditation and maybe the id is more, there are things here. So I don't want to get into that. But out of that behavioral psychology research, Pavlov's dog, right? You ring the bell and the dog salivates. You got operant conditioner, Skinner's operant conditioning. So, right? So when I go and I'm at the slot machine and my brain is doing stuff. Out of that realm of study came a realm of research about why do people make decisions, and specifically about people in general, and away from the physiological, if that's the right word, and I totally could be using that word incorrectly. Whoops. But, not the disease, not the I poke the rat here and the arm goes like this, but what's happening in the brain when I decide to purchase a Gatorade? What happens in the brain when I'm at the mall and I'm looking at products? These are much, much, much more complex structures, brain mapping, all kinds of stuff. And so we've gone from kind of the basic behavioral science to this kind of more higher branch level. And with that has come the field of economics, my hometown, as I like to think. So economics, this is my personal view of economics. I'm going to give you what I think. For the longest time, economics was philosophy. So Aristotle, philosophy being, I'm sitting around, and I'm thinking, and I have my wizard Aristotle beard here, and I go, yes, when people do this thing, it affects society thusly, and therefore they are connected, and that is economics. And to me, that is philosophy. That's economic philosophy. Adam Smith, which, if you went to college, you probably heard about Adam Smith and the graphs and the charts. That's all philosophy to me, personally. Yes, humans, I make a line here, and supply, and then I make a line here, and it's demand, and the two intersect in this graph that I have just drawn. It's really a mind exercise. That's not really economics. That's economic philosophy, and that's valuable. But that doesn't really tell you anything. Real economics, in my opinion, is about math. It's about math and it's about regressions. Economic regressions is a way of using statistics and economic modeling to figure out truths about the world. And it's a little bit of art, a little bit of science, because you can put anything into the machine and you can get anything out if you fudge the data. So it's all about trying to find adequate data and massaging it and creating an economic model to see not just that supply equals demand, but that when I change the price over here and I have an economic model statistically significant over here, then something has changed. So that's economics in my opinion. And that, for the longest time, relied on several very, very important assumptions. So I'm not going to, you can go YouTube basic economics, but there were a lot of assumptions that were made. And there was the savage assumptions, I believe that's what they're called. But I can boil them all down. Humans make rational decisions. So up until about the 1950s, and well beyond that, but definitely until the 1950s, basically all of economics, Keynesian economics and all that kind of stuff, at least in the academic sense, that was starting to do academic work where we're making models and we're investigating and using math and statistics. You couldn't do any of it. It was all useless if the decisions people make are random. And so in order for any of it to make sense, you just started with the assumption humans are rational and they make rational decisions. Seems like a good idea. But guess what? It doesn't work that way. And so starting in the 1970s, there were there's some founding fathers of behavioral economics. And Kahneman and Tversky were two researchers who worked together, and I'm going to talk a lot about this, but later, because it's older and it's very complicated. But they won Nobel Prizes for their work on prospect theory. And basically, they set the foundation for what behavioral economics is and how it should be investigated and what the style of writing is. And they're followed up by a lot of famous people. I'm just going to name drop a couple people. And if I don't say your favorite behavioral economist, or if you are a behavioral economist and I haven't mentioned you, maybe I'll get to your research. Don't be offended. There are a lot of great people out there. But definitely, the Dan Ariely's and the Richard Thaler's of the world who have Thaler just won a Nobel Prize, so it's really starting. But it all kind of starts with this assumption that don't assume people are rational. Or if you do assume people are rational, assume that they are, and then prove that they're not. And that's kind of the fun of behavioral economics. So what's the difference between behavioral economics and behavioral psychology, you may ask? So here's kind of my thought. Behavioral psychology, which is kind of what Susan does a lot of stuff in and studies, is a lot more about how the brain works. So if you think about the brain and you think about color, for example, or objects. So when an object comes towards you at the screen, right? Your brain is doing stuff when that happens. And you can use that, for example, to grab attention. That's kind of behavioral psychology, right? So why your behavior is doing stuff, but it's based on very much brain science specifically. And generally, the way I like to break it down is behavioral psychology are universal truths about humans. There are maybe some differences between cultures, but for the most part, it's uniform across all of humanity. People act like this because of their brain, and they do make these decisions. So there are universal truths throughout all society based on structures in the brain and based, entirely upon those things. So unless there's some sort of neurological damage, if I, like I said, do a sudden movement, it gets your attention. Peripheral vision to get the gist of the room, and that's just vision in general. But there's a whole lot, a lot more than that. That is about what are the universal truths about humans. behavioral economics is, I want to know if this particular person, given their set of attributes, what decision will they make in this particular situation given these sets of attributes? And so, for example, I'm going to go to the store, or I'm going to go to a Thai restaurant. Am I going to get pad see ew or pad Thai? And that's not something that behavioral psychology can tell you, because it's not a universal truth. Some people will get pad see ew, some people will get pad Thai. Depends on the person. It depends on the cost. It depends on, what people like. Do they like their Thai food to have a lot of sauce and gravy? Do they like their Thai food to be have more tamarind paste? I mean, you can quantify all these things, and it gets really hard. It gets really, really hard. And so I think the example that I like to give is, am I going to get a raise this year, right? Well, you have to calculate how you feel about your boss and how hard you work, and what does hard work even mean? And why will you work harder? Well, what do you value in your life? Is it your relationship? Is it how much you love someone? What is love? How do you measure love, right? So you get this like pyramid of variables that just cascade down to everything, and it becomes so complex. Now, there's a whole theory that if we can make, or if AI really is going to be the one who does this, but if we can make a perfect model of the universe, then we have proven that we ourselves are in a simulation, because of the chances that we were the first universe to be smart enough to create a simulation of the universe is very unlikely. So we are most likely living in a simulation. And I suggest you YouTube, are we in a simulation? And you'll have much better answers. And so economics gets really complicated really quickly. And so what you have to do is you have to focus your scope to we're just going to focus on this one little thing. We're going to assume this set of attributes, or we're going to, more importantly, we're going to pull from a random sample, and we'll just, and we'll see what happens. And we'll try and get one little sliver of something that's really cool. So for example, the next video I'm going to record after this is all about why people act differently about free. If you charge 1 penny for something, you have a very different response than if you charge 0 for something. And so just focusing on that narrow thing. So behavioral economics is really the trying to figure out how can we try and guess, estimate, predict what a specific person is going to do in a specific situation. And it might not always be true, but as long as if we set the parameters, we'll always get it right. Let me give you a very, very, very simple example, a mind journey, if you will. You are at a casino, and there are 2 games you can play, and the game is very simple. The dealer has a card, you have a card. You flip over your cards. Whoever has the highest card wins. Ties, the house wins. So that's the game. You can pick, okay? It's the same game in 2 tables. In one table, if you lose, you pay the casino $1,000. If you win, the casino pays you $1. The other game is, if you win, the casino pays you $1,000. If you lose, you pay the casino $1. So now we're going to take a person, right? And we're going to put them in this seat. Which one are you going to choose, right? Everyone, of course, is going to choose the one where the casino pays them all the money. That just makes sense. So that's a very, very simple example of how behavioral economics, how you can set up a problem and set up variables and determine the actions people will take. But there is, so that's the first half. But there's no substitute for real studies. And the topics I'm going to talk about use real people in real situations. They set up experiments in the field and studies and questionnaires and all kinds of stuff to get really cool research and validate their assumptions. So that's very, very, very important, is the validation process. So that is the general essence of behavioral economics, of what it is. It is a very loose term. Like I said, it overlaps with behavioral science. It overlaps with behavioral psychology. You can kind of use these terms interchangeably. But when I talk about economics, I'm specifically generally talking about what will someone do in a specific situation, to summarize. And if there can be math involved, that's a plus. So that's what behavioral economics is. If I reserve the right, by the way, to watch this and say it's confusing and redo it. So I hope that this was useful. But it's, and maybe I won't even publish this. Who knows? Maybe I will, and I will recommend that you skip it. Because, the best way to do it is just to jump right in. But that's kind of where behavioral economics comes from. That's what the field is. That's what it's about. That's how it's different. And it's a really, 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 really young field. It got started in the 1970s, if that. I mean, maybe like the first time you start to see various people have ideas in some papers was in like the 50s. But it wasn't until Kahneman and Tversky started doing their papers, and it was followed up by a bunch of people, like I mentioned, and then they followed up. So you've had this progression, and in the last 10 years, you've had it all go a step further because of the wide availability and the acceleration of ways to measure the brain. Because in the 70s and 80s, the best you could do was to set up a study and see if people did A or B. And then when you set it up to do A and they did B, then you're like, aha, I've discovered something interesting about the human brain. But we're going the next level these days because you can put on a cap, an EEG cap, right? And basically what the EEG cap does is it measures where blood flow is going. And so you could see things happen in the brain in a way you couldn't before. Obviously fMRI machines are the best, but they are expensive and you can't do a whole lot in them. So I'll just say EEG these days is getting to the point where you can put it on, and based on what people see, you can predict the decision they'll make. Sorry, not what people see, but based on what brain activity that the researcher can see, you can predict someone's behavior, like maybe 65. It's like 65-35 you can, which is not great. It's not like 100%. It's not a polygraph. It's nothing like that. But it's a lot better than before. So you're starting to get this convergence of the economic side. And so if you read like an old paper from Richard Thaler in like the 1980s, where it's just heavy econ and proofs and a lot of variables and economic models and trying to set up an economic model of how it is, that's kind of colliding with these other papers, maybe, that from more of a behavioral psychology perspective with EEG machines and with, knowing what we know about the structures of the brain and where different places connect and how people see the world and all kinds of stuff. So the fields do kind of merge and twist in a weird way. So I call it behavioral economics, but if I called it behavioral psychology, I could probably throw in a lot of these studies. I'm trying not to do studies that we've already talked about in other research and writings that we've done. So this hopefully should be mostly fresh. But I'm going to have to include some stuff that's also in behavioral psychology because it's just so important. Stuff about habits, stuff about vision and memory, and the brain structures. Those are not behavioral economic topics per se, but it's hugely important when you look at some of the effects that some of these other studies and things that I talk about will have. So that's behavioral economics in short. That's what it is. That's what the field is. This is what me rambling looks like. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to probably do another post that's maybe a little more concrete. Maybe, I might not. But this is it. I did my intro video. I did my what is behavioral economics, very spiel, way too long. And after this, we're going to get into the specific studies. We're going to jump into the research. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you all later.